cold, sterile tiles of the psychiatric ward were the last things I felt before the poison stopped my heart. My husband, Dominic, stood over me, his hand resting intimately on the waist of the woman who had stolen my life. They watched me die, their eyes gleaming with the promise of my inheritance. I closed my eyes, consumed by a burning, suffocating hatred, only to snap them open again to the scent of my own expensive vanilla candles. I was standing on the grand staircase of my own home, heart pounding. The grandfather clock chimed 6. The heavy oak door swung open. Dominic walked in, holding her hand. I hadn't died. I was reborn. And this time, I wasn't going to scream. The mahogany banister was smooth beneath my trembling fingers. I gripped it so hard my knuckles turned white, grounding myself in a reality I thought I had lost forever. November 12th. It was the exact day, the exact hour it had all begun. In my previous life, this was the moment my world shattered. Dominic had walked through that heavy oak door with a fragile, doe-eyed blonde trailing behind him like a lost puppy. He had told me she was the daughter of an old friend, a new intern at his investment firm who had just been evicted and needed a place to stay for a few days. In that past life, I had smelled the cheap jasmine perfume on his collar. I had seen the way his thumb casually stroked the back of her wrist. I had lost my mind. I threw a crystal vase at his head, screamed until my throat bled, and demanded she leave. That single, explosive reaction was the beginning of my end. Dominic used my hysteria to gaslight me, isolate me from my friends, convince Dr. Harrison to prescribe me heavy sedatives, and eventually commit me to a facility where I suffered a fatal accidental overdose. But as the heavy front door clicked shut now, echoing through the grand foyer of the estate my father had bought for us, the burning rage in my chest cooled into something far more dangerous. Ice. Victoria, darling, Dominic called out, his voice carrying that familiar, practiced warmth that now made my stomach churn. Can you come down here for a moment? I took a breath. The air filled my lungs perfectly. I was alive. I was 28 again, healthy, unmedicated, and holding the greatest weapon imaginable. Hindsight. I descended the stairs, my silk robe flowing behind me, pasting a serene, unbothered smile on my face. There they were. Dominic Hayes, looking devastatingly handsome in his tailored charcoal suit, and Chloe Adams, huddled slightly behind his broad shoulders, clutching a ratty canvas duffel bag. She looked up at me with wide, innocent hazel eyes, the eyes of a viper pretending to be a worm. Dominic, I purred, my voice as smooth as glass. I glided across the foyer and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek, breathing in the sickening scent of jasmine and betrayal. I didn't flinch. You're home early. Dominic cleared his throat, a flicker of apprehension crossing his features. He had been preparing for a fight. I could see the tension in his jaw. Yes, well, I brought someone with me. This is Chloe. She's a new junior analyst at the firm. She's had a terrible run of luck. Her landlord illegally locked her out this morning. I told her we had plenty of room in the guest wing until she gets back on her feet. He braced himself. Chloe looked down at her scuffed boots, playing the part of the humiliated victim perfectly. I let the silence stretch for just a fraction of a second too long, watching the nervous pulse flutter in Dominic's neck. Then, I let my smile widen into something radiant. I stepped forward, reaching out to take both of Chloe's hands in mine. She stiffened, surprised by the warm contact. Oh, you poor thing. I sighed, my tone dripping with genuine-sounding sympathy. Dominic, why didn't you text me? I would have had Maria prepare the south-facing suite. It gets the best morning light. I squeezed Chloe's hands, looking deeply into her bewildered eyes. Welcome, sister. Any friend of my husband's is family to me. You are safe here. The word sister slipped from my lips like a poisoned honey drop. Dominic blinked, utterly derailed by my reaction. His mouth opened, then closed. You don't mind? Mind? I laughed lightly, waving a dismissive hand. Don't be silly. This massive house is entirely too quiet anyway. Chloe, let me show you up. You must be exhausted. You can leave your bag. I'll have the staff bring it, Chloe stammered, her carefully rehearsed act of timid apology dying in her throat. Mrs. Hayes, I couldn't possibly impose. Nonsense, I insisted, looping my arm through hers. Her muscles were tight, resistant. Call me Victoria. We are going to be such good friends. I can feel it. As I led my own murderer up the sweeping staircase, I glanced back at Dominic. He stood in the foyer, staring up at us with a mixture of relief and profound confusion. He thought he had won a battle he didn't even have to fight. He didn't realize he had just invited the executioner into his own game. Once I settled Chloe into the guest suite, deliberately choosing the one directly above the grand piano I knew she hated, I returned to our master bedroom. I locked the door and walked into the massive walk-in closet. I sank to the plush carpet and finally let the facade drop. My hands shook violently. I pressed my face into a silk dress to muffle the dry, heaving sobs that racked my body. It wasn't sadness. It was the terrifying, overwhelming adrenaline of survival. I survived. I was here. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. Gemma? I whispered when my best friend answered. Tori? Why are you whispering? Are you hiding from Dominic again? Gemma's voice was light, teasing. In the past life, Dominic had convinced her I was paranoid and erratic, eventually driving a wedge between us. Not this time. I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice steadying, the steel returning to my spine. Dominic brought a woman home tonight. Her name is Chloe Adams. Do not react. Do not come over. Do not confront him. Wait, what? A woman? Victoria, what is going on? I need a favor. I need you to quietly look into a shell corporation called Vanguard Holdings. Dominic mentioned it briefly last week. In my previous life, I had discovered Vanguard Holdings only after the divorce papers were filed. It was where he had been siphoning my family trust. Victoria, you're scaring me. You sound different. I am different, I replied, staring at my own fierce reflection in the full-length mirror. I'm just waking up. Call me tomorrow. The next 3 days were a masterclass in psychological warfare. To destroy an enemy who thrives on drama, you must deny them their oxygen. Chloe was desperate for me to crack. She needed me to become the crazy, jealous wife so she could play the soothing, rational savior to my husband. I gave her nothing but sunshine. On Thursday morning, I descended the stairs to find Chloe in my kitchen. She was wearing one of Dominic's oversized white dress shirts, her bare legs perched on a stool at the island. She was sipping coffee from my favorite custom-made mug. It was a classic, aggressive mistress move marking territory. When Dominic walked into the kitchen a moment later, tying his tie, he froze at the sight of the two of us. He clearly hadn't expected me awake this early. Good morning, darling, I chimed brightly, walking past him and pressing a kiss to his jaw. Good morning, Chloe. Did you sleep well? Chloe lowered the mug, her eyes narrowing slightly. Yes, thank you, Victoria. The bed is incredibly soft. Actually, Dominic, I was hoping I could ride with you to the office today. My car is still in the shop. Of course, Dominic said quickly, though he kept his eyes on me, waiting for the explosion. Instead, I beamed. Oh, that's perfect. Dominic hates the commute alone. And Chloe, sweetie, before you go. I walked over to the espresso machine and pulled out a stunning brand new travel tumbler. I noticed you using that old ceramic mug. It's so bulky. I had Maria run out and grab you this heated travel cup. It keeps your coffee hot for hours at the office. I smoothly took my favorite mug from her hands, replacing it with the travel cup. Her fingers brushed mine, and they were ice cold. How thoughtful, she managed to say through a forced, tight-lipped smile. Only the best for our guests, I said cheerfully. As they left for the garage, I poured the coffee she had been drinking straight down the sink, watching the dark liquid swirl into the drain. That afternoon, while the house was empty, I dressed in a discreet black trench coat and took a cab across town to a dusty, inconspicuous building on the west side. Arthur Sterling, my late father's estate lawyer, sat behind a desk piled high with manila folders. Arthur was a man of the old guard, loyal to blood, not to marriage certificates. In my past life, I had ignored Arthur's warnings about Dominic's aggressive investment strategies. "Victoria," Arthur said, adjusting his spectacles as I closed his office door and locked it. "This is an unexpected visit. Dominic usually handles the quarterly reviews." "Dominic is no longer handling my finances, Arthur," I said, taking a seat opposite him. "And he is not to know I am here." Arthur paused, his pen hovering over a notepad. He looked at me, really looked at me, and seemed to recognize the ghost of my ruthless father in my eyes. "I see. What are we looking for?" "I want a complete audit of the primary trust. I suspect there are unauthorized transfers being made to an offshore entity under the name Vanguard Holdings. I also want you to begin quietly restructuring my personal assets. Separate everything. Bleed the joint accounts dry under the guise of aggressive long-term venture investments that require lock-in periods." Arthur didn't blink. He began to write. "If Dominic discovers the liquidity is gone, I will handle Dominic," I said. "Just build the wall, Arthur. Make it impenetrable." By the time I returned home, the stage was set for the evening. I had instructed the chef, Maria, to prepare Dominic's favorite meal, a complex beef Wellington. When Dominic and Chloe returned from work, they looked exhausted. Chloe immediately headed for the wine fridge, pouring herself a generous glass of my vintage Bordeaux. "Long day?" I asked, setting the dining table with our best silver. "Brutal," Dominic groaned, loosening his tie. "The quarterly reports are a nightmare. I actually helped organize the spreadsheets," Chloe chimed in, leaning against the counter and looking at Dominic with a sickeningly sweet smile. "Dominic works so hard. Someone has to make sure he doesn't burn out." It was a direct challenge. She was implying she was his true partner. I laughed gently, walking over and placing a hand on Dominic's shoulder, massaging the tense muscles. "We are so lucky to have you, Chloe. Isn't that right, Dom? It's so hard to find reliable administrative help these days. You know, sorting data entry and making copies, it takes a special kind of dedication." I felt Dominic stiffen under my hands. Chloe's face flushed a deep, ugly red. She was an analyst, not a secretary, and my deliberate demotion of her status in front of him hit a nerve. "I'm an analyst, Victoria," she snapped, her voice losing its sweet timbre for the first time. I gasped softly, my hand flying to my chest in exaggerated apology. "Oh my goodness! I am so sorry. I just assumed, well, since you're staying in our guest room, I didn't realize you were doing high-level work. Forgive me." Dominic cleared his throat loudly. "It's fine, Victoria. Chloe, don't overreact." Victoria didn't mean anything by it. Chloe stared at him, betrayed by his lack of defense. She slammed her wine glass on the counter and stormed upstairs without dinner. Dominic watched her go, a frown creasing his forehead. "She's a bit highly strung, isn't she?" I murmured, handing Dominic a fresh glass of scotch. "Hopefully, she finds a new apartment soon. Living out of a suitcase is clearly taking a toll on her mental health." Dominic took the scotch, downing it in one swallow. "Yeah, maybe." The first seed of doubt was planted. In my past life, Chloe was his sanctuary from his crazy wife. In this life, I was the sanctuary, and Chloe was the turbulent, ungrateful stressor. A week later, the annual Street Jude Charity Gala approached. It was the absolute pinnacle of our city's social calendar, an event dominated by old money and ruthless gossip. Most importantly, it was an event my mother-in-law, Eleanor Hayes, used to assert her dominance over the local elite. Eleanor was a terrifying woman. She wore Chanel-like armor and viewed everyone, including me, as entirely beneath her precious son. In my previous life, Dominic had convinced me to stay home from this gala, claiming I was too emotionally fragile. He had taken Chloe instead, introducing her to his mother. Chloe, ever the manipulator, had played the humble, adoring protégé perfectly, winning Eleanor over and cementing my replacement. This time, I was going. And I was bringing Chloe. A gala? Chloe asked, her eyes lighting up when I casually mentioned it over breakfast. Like a black tie event? Yes, I said, spreading jam on a piece of toast. Dominic and I go every year. It's incredibly tedious, but Eleanor insists. You know, Chloe, you should come with us. Dominic, who was reading the paper, choked on his coffee. Victoria, no. Chloe doesn't need to. Don't be silly, Dom, I interrupted smoothly. She's been working so hard at the firm. She deserves a night out. Plus, it's a great networking opportunity. Eleanor would love to meet the brilliant young woman helping you with the quarterly reports. Chloe's ambition immediately overrode any suspicion she had of me. I would love to go. But I don't have a gown. Oh, don't worry about that, I smiled. I have a dress in my closet that will fit you perfectly. I've never worn it. It was a gift, but the color simply washes me out. That afternoon, I led Chloe into my walk-in closet and handed her a garment bag. Inside was a spectacular, glittering emerald green gown. It was undeniably beautiful, plunging at the neckline with a high slit. Chloe gasped when she saw it, her eyes reflecting the sequins. It's breathtaking, she whispered, immediately holding it up against her body. It was made for you, I lied flawlessly. What I didn't tell Chloe was that the dress was notorious. It was from a highly controversial avant-garde designer who had recently been blacklisted by high society for making disparaging comments about Eleanor Hayes's favorite charity. Wearing that designer to an event hosted by Eleanor was the social equivalent of spitting in her face. I had bought it years ago, long before the scandal, and kept it buried in the back of my closet. Saturday night arrived. I wore an elegant, understated vintage Dior gown in midnight blue. I had my hair swept up into a classic, impeccable chignon. I looked exactly like the old money heiress I was. When Chloe descended the stairs, Dominic's breath hitched. She looked undeniably sexy. The emerald dress clung to her curves, highlighting her youth. She looked like a movie star. She also looked entirely inappropriate for a conservative philanthropic gala. Wow, Dominic breathed. Doesn't she look lovely? I asked, linking my arm through Dominic's. Let's go. We don't want to keep your mother waiting. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of black tuxedos and muted, elegant gowns. The moment we stepped into the room, I could feel the eyes turning toward us. Or rather, toward Chloe. The emerald dress was a beacon of ostentation in a room of whispered wealth. I guided us expertly through the crowd, heading straight for the head table where Eleanor Hayes sat like a queen on her throne, flanked by two other formidable dowagers. Mother, Dominic said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. Eleanor offered him a tight, aristocratic smile before her sharp eyes snapped to me. Victoria, you look acceptable. Thank you, Eleanor, I replied gracefully. I wanted to introduce you to someone. This is Chloe Adams. She's a junior analyst at Dominic's firm. She's had some housing trouble, so we've taken her in for the time being. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Chloe. I watched the temperature in the room plummet to absolute zero. Eleanor's eyes raked over the plunging neckline, the high slit, and finally recognized the distinct cut of the blacklisted designer. An analyst, Eleanor repeated, her voice dripping with venomous disdain. She didn't offer her hand. How charitable of you, Victoria, to take in strays. Tell me, Miss Adams, are you aware of the statement you are making tonight, or are you simply ignorant of the circles in which you currently stand? Chloe blinked, her confident smile faltering. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes. That dress, Eleanor hissed, leaning forward, is a Francois Laurent? The man who publicly mocked this very foundation. To wear it here is either a deliberate insult to me, or proof that you are entirely devoid of class. Which is it? Chloe went pale, her eyes darting frantically to me, then to Dominic. I didn't. Victoria gave it to me, she said. I gave you access to my closet, Chloe. Yes, I interrupted, my voice laced with gentle, profound disappointment. I told you to pick something conservative. I had no idea you chose the Laurent. I thought you threw that out, Dominic? I haven't worn it since the scandal. Dominic looked trapped. He couldn't defend the dress to his mother without alienating her, and he couldn't defend Chloe without looking like a fool. Mother, it's just a mistake. Chloe doesn't follow high-fashion politics. Clearly, Eleanor sneered, looking at Chloe as if she were something scraped off the bottom of a shoe. She looks like she belongs on a street corner, not at a charity gala. Dominic, handle your employee. Get her out of my sight. Tears welled up in Chloe's eyes. Humiliation radiated from her in waves. Without a word, she turned and fled toward the restrooms, pushing past waiters and socialites. Dominic ran a hand over his face, exasperated. I'll go check on her. No, darling, stay with your mother, I said softly, placing a restraining hand on his arm. I'll go. It's my fault for not checking what she put on. I'll take care of it. I walked away, leaving Dominic to endure the wrath of his mother's interrogation. As I pushed through the heavy gilded doors of the ladies' room, I found Chloe leaning over the marble sink, sobbing hysterically, mascara running down her face. She looked up at me in the mirror, her eyes full of raw, burning hatred. You did this on purpose. You knew. I didn't scream. I didn't gloat. I walked up behind her, pulled a pristine tissue from my clutch, and gently dabbed the tears from her cheek. Oh, sweet sister, I whispered, leaning in close so she could feel the chill of my breath against her ear. We're just getting started. The morning after the Street Jude Gala, the atmosphere in my home was as brittle as spun glass. I sat at the breakfast island, casually sipping a matcha latte, listening to the heavy, dragging footsteps of my husband and his mistress descending the stairs. Dominic looked as though he had aged 5 years overnight. The dark circles under his eyes spoke volumes of the argument I had deliberately left them alone to have. Chloe trailed behind him, wearing a high-necked, oversized gray sweater, a stark, pathetic contrast to the plunging emerald gown of the previous night. She wouldn't even look at me. Good morning, I chimed, swiping through my tablet with a perfectly manicured finger. Did you two sleep well? Chloe, I had Maria put extra eucalyptus in your shower caddy. It's supposed to be excellent for stress. Chloe flinched at the word stress. She poured herself a cup of black coffee, her hands trembling slightly. I'm fine, Victoria. Thank you. Dominic rubbed his temples, sliding into a bar stool. Tori, can we talk about the accounts today? I was trying to run some projections for the Vanguard portfolio last night, and my access to the primary family trust was denied. There must be a glitch with the bank. I set my tablet down, folding my hands neatly on the marble counter. This was it. The first turn of the screw. Oh, darling, it's not a glitch, I said, my voice laced with apologetic sweetness. I met with Arthur Sterling yesterday afternoon. We were going over my late father's estate, and Arthur strongly advised that we restructure the trust. He said the current liquidity was far too exposed to market volatility. Dominic froze, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. The color drained from his face. Restructure? Victoria, you can't just restructure the trust without telling me. I use those funds to leverage the firm's quarterly investments. I know you do, sweetie, I murmured, standing up to wrap my arms around his tense shoulders from behind. I rested my chin on his collarbone, staring directly at Chloe. But you've been working yourself into the ground. You're so stressed. I looked at the numbers, and I realized how much of my family's money you were having to manage on top of your own clients. It's too much pressure on you. Victoria, it's not pressure, it's my job. He snapped, his voice rising in panic. How long is the lock-in period? Just 5 years? I said breezily, feeling the muscle in his jaw jump beneath my cheek. Arthur locked the capital into a high-yield, untouchable venture fund managed by Nathaniel Forbes over at Sterling Forbes. You won't have to worry about managing a single cent of it until 2031. Isn't that a relief? Dominic looked like he was going to vomit. Without the liquidity of my family trust, his firm's aggressive leveraging strategy would collapse. More importantly, his private slush fund Vanguard Holdings, which he had been using to slowly drain my assets to fund his secret life with Chloe, was now completely starved. 5 years, Dominic whispered, his eyes wide with horror. Chloe, sensing the shift in power but not fully understanding the financial mechanics, tried to play the supportive partner. Dominic, it's okay. We'll just adjust the Q4 projections at the firm. I can help you run the new numbers. Dominic turned on her, his temper flaring. You can't run numbers on zero capital, Chloe. You don't know what you're talking about. Stay out of it. Chloe shrank back, her eyes watering. It was the first time he had ever snapped at her in my presence. In my previous life, Dominic had always treated her like a fragile, brilliant flower while treating me like a burdensome idiot. Watching the dynamic invert was intoxicating. Dominic, don't raise your voice at her, I scolded gently, playing the peacemaker. She's just trying to help. Speaking of which, Chloe, since you're staying with us for a while, I thought we could talk about household contributions. Chloe blinked, wiping a stray tear. Contributions? Well, yes, I smiled warmly. I know things are tight for you right now, but independence is so important for a young woman's self-esteem. I wouldn't dream of taking your rent, of course. But Maria takes Sundays off, and grocery delivery is getting exorbitant. I thought perhaps you could handle the Sunday household grocery runs? Out of your own pocket, just to feel like you're contributing to the space. I was asking a junior analyst, who was already heavily in debt, to fund the weekly organic imported groceries for a massive estate. It would cost her at least $500 a week. I suppose I could do that, Chloe stammered, trapped by her own previous declarations of wanting to pull her weight. Wonderful, I beamed. I'll have Maria leave you the list. Make sure to get the beluga lentils, not the standard ones. Dominic's digestion simply can't handle the standard ones. I kissed Dominic's cold cheek and grabbed my purse. Have a great day at the office, you two. Don't work too hard. As I walked out the door, the silence in the kitchen was deafening. I slipped into my Mercedes, rolled up the tinted windows, and let out a long, dark laugh. The financial bleed had begun. Dominic was staring down the barrel of insolvency, and Chloe was about to realize that her sugar daddy's sugar came entirely from his wife. By week 3, the psychological toll was visibly manifesting. Chloe had dark bags under her eyes. Her skin was breaking out, and she had developed a nervous habit of chewing on her thumbnail. My house was a fortress of invisible tripwires, and I was the unseen architect of her madness. In my past life, Dominic had driven me insane by moving my belongings, altering my schedule, and denying conversations we had explicitly shared. You must have forgotten, Victoria, he would say. You've been so erratic lately. Now, it was Chloe's turn to doubt her own mind. It started small. I would slip into the guest suite while she was at work and move her expensive face creams from the vanity to the bottom drawer. When she asked Maria if someone had been in her room, I would feign concern. Chloe, sweetie, Maria hasn't been upstairs all day, I'd say, placing a comforting hand on her arm. Are you sure you didn't just misplace them? You've been so forgetful lately. You forgot to buy the saffron on Sunday, remember? Then, I escalated. Chloe was a light sleeper. Every night at 3:00 a.m., I would use my phone to trigger the smart home speakers in the ceiling of her room, playing the faint, muffled sound of a baby crying for exactly 10 seconds before shutting it off. When she came down to breakfast, looking terrified, and asked if anyone else heard the crying, Dominic just stared at her. A baby? Dominic asked, his brow furrowed in annoyance. He was already stressed to the breaking point over the frozen trust funds. The last thing he had patience for was Chloe's sudden hysteria. Chloe, we live on a gated 2-acre lot. There are no babies here. I swear, Dominic, it sounded like it was in the walls, she pleaded, looking to him for validation. Perhaps it was just a bad dream, I suggested, pouring her a cup of tea. Stress does terrible things to the mind. You know, my aunt developed auditory hallucinations when she was overworked. Chloe looked at me, a flash of pure, terrified realization in her eyes. She knew I was doing something, but she had absolutely no proof. To accuse the perfectly supportive, smiling wife of piping ghost sounds into her room would make her look completely insane. She was trapped in the very cage they had built for me. The climax of this psychological warfare occurred on a Friday night. I had organized an intimate dinner party, inviting Harrison Wyatt, the CEO of a major tech conglomerate, and his wife, Clara. Harrison was Dominic's last hope for a massive portfolio acquisition, the only thing that could save his firm now that my family's money was locked away. Chloe had spent the entire week preparing. Desperate to prove her worth to Dominic, she had studied Harrison Wyatt's company profile endlessly. Before the guests arrived, I found Chloe in the kitchen, frantically reviewing her notes. "You look nervous, sister," I said, leaning against the counter. "I'm fine," she snapped, no longer pretending to be sweet when we were alone. "I'm going to secure this account for Dominic. I know Wyatt's restructuring strategy inside and out." "Oh, the aggressive push into European markets?" I asked casually. Chloe smirked. "Exactly. I'm going to pitch him a risk assessment model over dessert." I smiled back. "Brilliant. Just be careful. I heard a rumor at the country club that Harrison is incredibly sensitive about the recent failure of his Berlin branch. He lost millions. I wouldn't bring up Europe." Chloe frowned, her confidence wavering. "Wait, Berlin failed? That wasn't in the public quarterly reports." "Of course not, they buried it," I whispered conspiratorially. "But you know how old money talks. If I were you, I'd focus your pitch on their domestic AI expansions. That's his real passion right now." Chloe's eyes lit up with the thrill of insider knowledge. "Thank you, Victoria. I appreciate it. Anything for family," I purred. Dinner was a masterclass in tension. Dominic was sweating through his Tom Ford suit, desperately laughing at Harrison's dry jokes. Clara Wyatt, a shrewd, elegant woman in her 50s, seemed entirely bored until the main course was cleared. That was Chloe's moment. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table of faux pas. Clara immediately clocked with a raised eyebrow. "Mr. Wyatt," Chloe began, using her best corporate voice, "Dominic and I were reviewing your portfolio, and I have to say, your pivot away from European markets to focus entirely on domestic AI is a stroke of genius. Cutting your losses in Berlin was incredibly brave." The entire dining room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the Persian rug. Harrison Wyatt lowered his wineglass slowly. His face flushed a dark, angry purple. "Excuse me?" Dominic looked like he had been struck by lightning. "Chloe, what are you talking about?" The Berlin branch," Chloe stammered, suddenly realizing she had stepped on a landmine, though she didn't know how big. "The failure of the European expansion?" Harrison stood up, tossing his linen napkin onto his plate. "My daughter manages the Berlin branch, young lady. And it just posted a record 30% profit margin this quarter. I have no idea what kind of incompetent analysts you employ, Dominic. But if this girl is handling your data, I wouldn't trust you to manage a lemonade stand, let alone my pension fund." "Harrison, please, there's a misunderstanding," Dominic begged, standing up so fast his chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. "We are leaving," Clara Wyatt announced coldly, rising to join her husband. "Thank you for the meal, Victoria. It was lovely. The company, however, leaves much to be desired." As the Wyatts walked out the front door, slamming it shut behind them, Dominic turned to Chloe. The look in his eyes wasn't just anger. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. The illusion of his brilliant, helpful mistress had just shattered, costing him millions. "Dominic, I swear, Victoria told me," Chloe screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She told me about Berlin before dinner. She set me up," I gasped, pressing my hands to my mouth, my eyes filling with instant, convincing tears. "Chloe, how could you say such a thing? I don't know the first thing about tech markets. I spend my days managing the household and charity boards. Why would I ever try to ruin my own husband's career?" Dominic looked at my tearful, shocked face, and then at Chloe's desperate, manic expression. The choice was easy. "You are out of your goddamn mind, Chloe," Dominic snarled, his voice vibrating with rage. "You embarrassed me. You cost me the Wyatt account. You're hallucinating babies in the walls, and now you're blaming Victoria for your own sheer stupidity." She's lying, Chloe sobbed, stepping toward him. Get upstairs, Dominic ordered, pointing toward the sweeping staircase. Now, before I pack your bags myself. Chloe looked at him, completely broken, realizing the man she thought she had conquered was now her warden. She turned and fled up the stairs, sobbing hysterically. I reached out and placed a gentle, comforting hand on Dominic's back. Oh, darling, I am so sorry. I think Chloe might need professional help. She's completely unhinged. Dominic let out a ragged breath, leaning his head back. I don't know what to do anymore, Tori. She's a disaster. Don't worry, I whispered softly into the dark foyer. I'll take care of everything. With the Wyatt account gone and the family trust frozen, Dominic was officially drowning. He started spending late nights in his home office, guzzling scotch and desperately calling second-tier investors. The stress was eroding the handsome, charming facade he had used to lure both me and Chloe. Chloe was a ghost in my house. She stayed in her room, only creeping down to the kitchen when she thought I wasn't there. She was living on eggshells, terrified of Dominic's temper, and deeply suspicious of me. But suspicion isn't enough. I needed her to actively destroy him. I needed the final blow to come from the inside. It was time to introduce Vanguard Holdings back into the narrative. On a rainy Tuesday, while Dominic was at the firm screaming at his brokers, I let myself into his home office. I had the master key to everything, a perk of being the wealthy wife who owned the house. I unlocked his heavy mahogany desk drawer and pulled out a stack of manila folders. I had asked my friend Gemma, who had spent the last month quietly leveraging her contacts in corporate law, to draft a series of highly authentic-looking forged documents. They were letters from the IRS and the SEC, addressed to Vanguard Holdings, outlining a massive, impending investigation for tax evasion, wire fraud, and severe embezzlement. I slipped the forged documents into a red folder labeled Confidential, Vanguard Liquidations, and placed it right on top of Dominic's keyboard. It was impossible to miss. Then, I went upstairs, knocked softly on Chloe's door, and opened it before she could answer. She was lying on the bed in her pajamas, staring blankly at the ceiling. Chloe, dear, I said warmly. Maria made some fresh scones. I'm running out to the country club for a luncheon, but Dominic texted me. He left a red folder on his desk in the office, and he needs it scanned and emailed to him immediately. Could you be a dear and handle that? You are his analyst. After all. Chloe sat up, wiping her eyes. The chance to be useful to Dominic, to perhaps get back into his good graces after the Wyatt disaster, was a beacon of hope for her. He wants me to do it? Specifically asked for you, I lied flawlessly. I'd do it, but the scanner always jams on me, and I'm already late. I left the house, drove my car down the street, and parked out of sight. I pulled up the security camera app on my phone, watching the feed from Dominic's office. Right on cue, Chloe slipped into the office. She saw the red folder on the keyboard. She picked it up. As she opened it to scan the pages, I watched her freeze. Even on a small screen, I could see the blood drain from her face. She was an analyst. She knew exactly what she was looking at. She was looking at a federal investigation that would result in 20 years in prison and absolute financial ruin. She was looking at the reality that the wealthy, powerful man she had hitched her wagon to was actually a sinking ship, weighed down by federal crimes. Chloe dropped the folder on the desk. She backed away, clutching her chest, hyperventilating. Her entire motivation for enduring my psychological torture and Dominic's sudden cruelty was the promise of a lavish, wealthy future once they finally pushed me out. Now she realized there was no wealth. There was only debt, fraud, and prison. I smiled, putting my car in drive and heading to my luncheon. The poison was in the apple. Now, I just had to wait for it to take effect. When I returned home that evening, the house was eerily silent. The storm had finally broken. I found Dominic in the living room. The red folder was clutched in his hand, crumpled and torn. He was pacing like a caged animal, his face pale, his eyes bloodshot. The smell of scotch was overpowering. Dominic? I asked softly, dropping my keys into the silver bowl by the door. What's wrong? Where's Chloe? He stopped pacing and looked at me, a hollow, dead look in his eyes. She's gone. I blinked, feigning shock. Gone? What do you mean, gone? She didn't even say goodbye? She packed her bags and left while I was at work. Dominic laughed. A harsh, cracking sound that bordered on hysterical. But she didn't just leave, Victoria. She robbed me. Robbed you? I gasped, stepping closer. Dominic threw the red folder onto the coffee table. She was snooping in my office. She found these insane forged documents. I don't know where the hell they came from. They look like federal indictments against my private holding company. She must have thought I was going to prison. He ran a shaking hand through his hair, gripping the roots. She panicked. She thought the feds were coming to seize assets. So, she logged into my personal laptop, the one she had the password to, and wired the last remaining liquid cash I had in my personal accounts into an offshore crypto wallet. $300,000, Victoria. Everything I had left outside of the firm. I covered my mouth, hiding the sharp, predatory smile that threatened to break through. In my wildest dreams, I hadn't expected Chloe to be quite so ruthless. When pushed into a corner, the viper had bitten its own handler to survive. Oh my God, Dominic. I breathed. We have to call the police. I can't, he shouted, throwing his glass against the stone fireplace, shattering it into 100 glittering pieces. If I call the police, they look into the accounts. They look into Vanguard. I can't have anyone looking into Vanguard, Victoria, because... He stopped, his chest heaving, realizing how close he had come to confessing his own embezzlement of my funds. Because what, Dominic? I asked, my voice dropping its sweet, high-pitched timbre, settling into a cold, terrifying calm. Dominic looked at me. Really looked at me. And for the first time, he noticed that my eyes were completely dry. There was no sympathy. There was no confusion. There was only the calculated, chilling gaze of a woman watching a trap snap shut. Victoria, he whispered, taking a step back, as the realization slowly dawned on him. The frozen trust, the ruined dinner party, the forged federal documents sitting on his desk. Did you do this? I stepped over the shattered glass of his tumbler, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. I walked right up to him, so close I could smell the fear radiating off his skin. You brought a stray into my home, Dominic, I whispered, reaching up to adjust the lapel of his ruined suit. You planned to drain my life, lock me away in a ward, and steal my name for a cheap imitation. You thought I was a fool. His jaw trembled. Tori, please. My name is Victoria. I corrected him, my voice like a scalpel. And you have absolutely nothing left. The silence in the living room was absolute, broken only by the ragged, desperate sound of Dominic's breathing. He stared at me, his handsome face twisting into a grotesque mask of realization and rage. The woman standing before him wasn't the fragile, easily manipulated wife he had married to plunder. I was a stranger wearing her skin. You set this up, he hissed, his voice trembling as he stepped over the shattered glass. You forged those documents. You manipulated Chloe into stealing from me. You froze the trust. I simply protected my assets, Dominic, I replied, my tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. And I cannot be held responsible for the criminal actions of your mistress. If she decided to commit wire fraud and empty your personal accounts, that speaks to her character, not mine. I'll kill you, he snarled. The civilized veneer finally cracked, revealing the violent, desperate animal underneath. He lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat. In my past life, this was the moment I would have cowered. The moment his physical dominance would have broken my spirit. But I didn't even flinch. Before his fingers could graze the silk of my blouse, a massive shadow detached itself from the hallway. Gideon, the private security contractor I had quietly hired 3 weeks ago, and instructed to wait in the West Wing every evening, stepped forward. He caught Dominic by the collar of his suit and slammed him against the stone fireplace with a sickening thud. Dominic gasped. The wind knocked out of him, his cheek pressed against the rough masonry. "You were saying, darling?" I asked, stepping closer to where he was pinned. "Get this thug off me!" Dominic choked out, struggling uselessly against Gideon's iron grip. "This is my house." Actually, I corrected him, pulling a thick, cream-colored envelope from my designer bag and tossing it onto the coffee table beside the crumpled fake IRS documents. This house was purchased entirely with funds from the primary trust. The deed is in the name of a holding company controlled by my father's estate. Which means, as of this morning, when Arthur Sterling finalized the restructuring, this is entirely my house. You are a guest, and your invitation has just been revoked. Dominic's eyes widened, darting to the envelope. What is that? Divorce papers. Along with an eviction notice, I smiled warmly. I've cited infidelity, emotional abuse, and extreme financial mismanagement. And before you even think about fighting me for alimony or a settlement to save your failing firm, I suggest you look at page 4. Gideon loosened his grip just enough for Dominic to snatch the envelope with a shaking hand. He ripped it open. Tucked behind the standard legal jargon was a single, photocopied spreadsheet. I watched his eyes scan the page. It was the real ledger for Vanguard Holdings. The one he thought was hidden behind 3 layers of encrypted firewalls on his server at work. Gemma's corporate espionage contacts had proven worth every penny. It detailed every single unauthorized transfer, every forged signature, and every dime of my family's money he had siphoned over the last 2 years. The fake IRS documents Chloe found were just a prop, I whispered, leaning in so only he could hear. But this ledger is real, and it is currently sitting in a sealed envelope in Arthur Sterling's safe. If you contest the divorce, if you ask for a single penny, or if you ever try to contact me again, Arthur will overnight that ledger to the actual Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI. Dominic stopped breathing. The fight completely left his body. He was looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary. "You have 30 minutes to pack a bag," I said, checking my Cartier watch. "Gideon will escort you out. Leave the keys to the Mercedes. That's in my name, too." "Tori," he whispered. A pathetic, wet sound. "I have no money. Chloe took the last of my liquid cash. My credit lines are maxed from the firm. Where am I supposed to go?" "I hear your mother's guest room is lovely this time of year," I smiled, turning on my heel. "Don't steal any of my silver on the way out, Dominic. I'd hate to have Gideon break your hands." The beauty of a perfectly executed trap is that the prey never realizes they are caught until the cage is locked. Chloe thought she was a mastermind. She thought she had outsmarted a sinking ship by wiring Dominic's last $300,000 to an offshore crypto wallet and fleeing into the night. What she didn't know was that the secure offshore portal she had found bookmarked on Dominic's private browser wasn't his at all. I had planted it there 2 weeks ago, knowing that in her desperation to prove her worth to him, she regularly snooped through his laptop. The next morning, I sat in my sunlit conservatory, sipping Earl Grey tea. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered and let the silence stretch. "Victoria?" A small, trembling voice asked. It was Chloe. "Hello, sister," I purred. "I'm surprised you're calling me. Dominic was quite distressed when he found out you robbed him blind." "I didn't have a choice," she sobbed, her voice echoing slightly, as if she were in a public bathroom or a cheap motel. "He's going to prison. The feds are coming for Vanguard. I had to protect myself. But Victoria, something is wrong. I tried to access the crypto wallet to transfer the funds to my personal account, and it's locked. It's asking for a secondary biometric key. Dominic never set up biometrics." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. "Oh dear, that does sound like a problem." "Victoria, please," she begged, abandoning all pretense of hatred. "You have access to his passwords. You have to know the master key. I'll split the money with you, $150,000 each. Just help me unlock it. I'm at a motel off the interstate, and I can't even afford to pay for a second night. I let out a soft, melodic laugh that made her breath hitch over the line. Chloe, I said gently, there is no secondary biometric key. The wallet is empty. Silence. What do you mean? The crypto portal you used on Dominic's computer was a dummy site. I explained slowly, relishing every syllable. It was a routing protocol designed by a very expensive cybersecurity firm. When you entered the command to wire Dominic's $300,000 to that offshore wallet, the site automatically rerouted the funds into a highly secure, completely legal blind trust. My blind trust? I could hear the phone slip in her hand. No, you couldn't have. You did all the heavy lifting, darling, I said. You logged into his accounts. You initiated the wire transfer. You committed grand larceny and federal wire fraud. I simply provided the destination. Thank you, by the way, for returning the money Dominic stole from me. It saved my lawyers a tremendous amount of paperwork. You tricked me, she screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. I'll go to the police. I'll tell them you set it up. Tell them what, Chloe? I asked, my voice turning to ice. That you illegally accessed your boss's computer to steal $300,000, and you're upset because the money went to his wife instead of your pocket? I'm sure the district attorney will be fascinated by your victimhood. Victoria, please? She wailed, the realization of her utter doom crashing down on her. I have nothing. My career is over. Dominic hates me. I have $30 in my checking account. What am I supposed to do? I suggest you put on your best suit, I said. The one you didn't wear to the gala. The police should be arriving at your motel in about 5 minutes. Dominic filed a police report for the theft last night from his mother's house. Oh. And Chloe? What? She sobbed, completely broken. I never liked being called your sister. I hung up the phone and blocked the number. 5 minutes later, my security feed alerted me to a news notification. A young woman had been arrested at a roadside motel on multiple counts of corporate theft and wire fraud. The footage showed Chloe, mascara running down her face, being shoved into the back of a squad car in handcuffs. She looked exactly the way I had felt in my past life, helpless, ruined, and entirely alone. The Michelin-starred restaurant, Le Rêve, was a cathedral of quiet wealth, the kind of establishment where fortunes were casually traded over imported white truffles and whispered, polite threats. I sat at a secluded corner booth, bathed in the soft, diffused light of the Parisian crystal chandeliers overhead, wearing a sharply tailored, pristine white Dior suit. It was the armor of a woman who had already won the war. Across from me, the leather chair remained stubbornly empty until exactly 1:00 p.m., when Eleanor Hayes finally swept into the dining room. Except, she didn't sweep anymore. She faltered. The terrifying, formidable matriarch who used to view me as entirely beneath her, a minor inconvenience on her Chanel heels, looked completely hollowed out. The deep, stress-carved lines around her mouth and eyes were impossible to hide. Even under expertly applied layers of expensive foundation, her signature string of South Sea pearls looked heavy, almost suffocating on her frail neck. In my previous life, a single, disappointed glare from those icy blue eyes would have sent me spiraling into frantic apologies and self-doubt. Today, I simply sipped my sparkling water and watched her slide into the booth, her hands visibly trembling as she placed her scuffed Birkin bag on the velvet cushion beside her. You look, well, Victoria, Eleanor managed, the words practically choking her as they left her throat. She didn't reach for her napkin. She looked like she was preparing for an execution. I feel magnificent, Eleanor, I replied, my voice a smooth, unbroken melody. I signaled the sommelier with a slight nod to pour the vintage Dom Perignon I had pre-ordered. Thank you for joining me. I understand your schedule has been rather chaotic lately. Chaotic was a polite euphemism for total annihilation. Dominic had been forced to move back into his mother's palatial Oakbrook estate 3 months ago, bringing the undeniable stench of his absolute ruin with him. After the Wyatt account disaster and the meticulously planted rumors of federal investigations, I had quietly seeded throughout the country club, Dominic's investment firm had spectacularly imploded. I had watched the news coverage with a cup of chamomile tea in my sunlit conservatory. Desperate clients banging on the glass doors of his office, demanding their liquidated portfolios, while Dominic hid out of sight. Chapter 11 bankruptcy had been officially filed within 3 weeks of that broadcast. Eleanor ignored the champagne bubbling in her glass. She leaned forward, her manicured nails digging fiercely into the thick, starched white tablecloth. Let's dispense with the theatrical pleasantries. You destroyed my son. You took his home, his dignity. And you leaked those vicious, baseless rumors to sabotage his firm. You are a monster, Victoria. I let a slow, chilling smile touch my lips, meeting her hostile gaze without a fraction of a flinch. Dominic destroyed himself, Eleanor. I merely handed him the rope and watched him tie his own knot. But we aren't here to discuss your son's profound lack of business acumen or his criminal tendencies. I reached down, unclasped my leather briefcase, and pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila folder. I slid it deliberately across the polished mahogany table. It stopped inches from her untouched crystal glass. Eleanor stared at the folder as if it contained a live explosive. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. What is this? As you are intimately aware, my late father's estate controls significant leverage in commercial and private real estate across the state. I began, my voice dropping to a soothing, deadly hum, including, as it turns out, the primary mortgage on the Hayes family estate in Oakbrook. Eleanor's face drained of what little color it had left. Her breath hitched in her throat, a sickening realization dawning on her. That mortgage is held by the First National Bank. My late husband set that up 30 years ago. It has nothing to do with you. It was held by the bank, I corrected smoothly, picking up my champagne glass. Until last Thursday, my primary holding company purchased the debt portfolio at a premium. You see, Eleanor, Dominic hasn't paid his share of the mortgage in 4 months. He drained his own accounts. And then he started draining your personal retirement funds to keep his high-priced defense attorneys on retainer to fight off the SEC. You've been quietly drowning in his debt, haven't you? She didn't answer. A single, pathetic tear spilled over her lower lash line, carving a wet path through her makeup. You are in severe default, Eleanor, I said softly, the absolute finality of my words hanging in the air between us, and I am officially foreclosing on the property. The eviction notices will be posted on your iron gates by tomorrow morning. You cannot do this, she whispered, her voice cracking into a desperate rasp. The haughty queen was finally reduced to a begging, terrified commoner. That house has been in the Hayes family for 3 generations. It is all I have left in this world, Victoria. Please, I am an old woman. I leaned back, studying her with absolute icy detachment. You raised a parasite. You taught him that women were mere stepping stones, resources to be used, drained, and discarded. In another life, you sat by and applauded while he brought his mistress into my home, hoping to drive me insane so you could keep my family's money for yourselves. You don't get to keep the castle, Eleanor, when you lose the war. I stood up, leaving a crisp $100 bill on the table to cover the water and the untouched champagne. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Don't take the crystal chandeliers when you pack. They belong to me now. I walked out of Le Rave without looking back, stepping out of the hushed, tense atmosphere and into the blinding, crisp sunshine of a brilliant Tuesday afternoon. My private driver, Thomas, stood by the open door of my Maybach, holding it for me. Where to, Miss Sterling? Just drive, Thomas, I said, sliding into the plush leather seat and closing my eyes as the heavy door shut with a solid, comforting thud. Take the scenic route. As the heavy car glided seamlessly through the bustling city streets, I opened my eyes just in time to see us pass the towering, sterile white walls of the psychiatric facility on the edge of town. In that past timeline, I had been carried out of those heavy doors in a body bag, a forgotten, tragic footnote in Dominic Hayes' ruthless rise to power. But not today. Today, Dominic was living in a squalid, rented studio apartment, facing a mountain of civil lawsuits that would hound him until his dying breath. Chloe was sitting in a federal detention center, awaiting trial for corporate wire fraud. Her youth and ambition rotting behind steel bars. And Eleanor was going back to a stolen mansion to pack her generational pride into cheap cardboard boxes. I looked at my own reflection in the tinted window. I had been burned to the absolute ground, but the fire hadn't killed me. It had forged me into a weapon that couldn't be broken. The game was officially over. The board was cleared. And the Queen had taken absolutely everything. The story of Victoria, Dominic, Chloe, and Eleanor has come to its spectacular, icy end. Victoria didn't just survive the betrayal that once claimed her life. She orchestrated a flawless symphony of revenge, leaving her enemies with absolutely nothing. From freezing the family trust and setting the ultimate honeypot trap, to the final, crushing foreclosure on her cruel mother-in-law, she proved that a woman reborn is a force of nature that cannot be stopped. If Victoria's savage, calculating comeback had you hooked until the very last second, smash that like button. This is just one of many thrilling tales of betrayal, rebirth, and absolute justice we have coming your way. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on the drama. Share this video with anyone who loves seeing karma served ice cold, and leave a comment below with your favorite plot twist.